What we've been looking at so far are the physical objects, the physical screens which we typically use to access and automate underlying applications. But automations are not simply limited to communicating directly via screens. They do provide the functionality to actually access the underlying databases and query them directly, or access application program interfaces or APIs, which allow us to get services externally from third parties, for example, or internally from our existing applications. Using these different methods of access, though, come with some pros and cons. One of the biggest advantages of accessing via the screens is the fact that all inbuilt validation and security still is maintained. So your automation can never breach any of the validation that's already built into the application. As soon as you're accessing the database directly, of course you have to really understand what you're doing on the database, or you can have significant performance issues. And these different types of functionality are all useful to use within your automation, but are also going to be somewhat dependent upon the skill level of the people who are writing the application's automations, or mix of skills. So for example, simple physical screen access you may assign to one team, but may use your center of excellence if you're developing databases or other applications. And we'll talk a little bit more about configuring a center of excellence later on when we talk about how do you start to scale up. So automation software provides you with a wide range of different options when accessing those underlying systems. In fact, if all else fails, the old screen scraping technology that we talked about earlier also is still in existence, and some of the solutions provide you with that ability to revert back to more traditional screen scraping. But screen scraping comes with a problem that you are always accessing or looking for the same types of information on the screen being in approximately the same place, and therefore is much more susceptible to underlying changes. When we think about automation, we think about it in layers, and the first layer are the physical objects, the screens that you're accessing that a user would normally interact with. The second layer, sometimes called more of the logical design layer, contains the business logic or the business rules and the workflow for which you're going to work through. And then the third layer, potentially for desktop automation, is a presentation layer. The presentation layer is the layer which interacts now with the users. The presentation layer for RPA, which is unattended, can be file outputs or emails, etc., not direct interaction. Different applications make it more difficult or easier to do those different layers. Win Automation, for example, is a very simple implementation and works directly with physical objects. By doing so, the opportunities for reuse are limited. NICE, on the other hand, creates several different layers, allowing different teams to work on those different layers simultaneously. This is great if you want to have multiple teams operating, but does create more time and thinking about the design before you begin. UiPath also works directly with physical objects, so you get the benefits of Win Automation too in terms of that very rapid interactive development. But also contains some of the multi-team and enterprise level deployment type options for reuse. So it's a middle ground and actually works well in both environments. Working directly with the screens or the physical objects allows you to do rapid development, typically only needs business level skills, but becomes increasingly difficult to do as complexity increases and actually has limited or no reuse capability, leading to some degrees of duplication. A simple change can then sometimes be complex to fix because the same field will exist in multiple different automations and will need to be changed in each one of them. Accessing the system via a more logical level means it's very slow to start and development takes longer. The physical and logical design skills are typically much more technical, requiring a greater level of skill than your typical business users. But it does give you a high level of control and allows you to deal with high levels of development complexity, and it's easy to build a common component library that can be shared and reused. Change then can be quite simplified because the change to a single component often is only changed in one place. Now, all automations will need to be tested, but the change only needs to take place in one instance. So there are pros and cons to these different environments or options available to you when you're selecting your automation tool. And we will see some of this firsthand because Win Automation, for example, is very quick to develop some simple automations. But that simplicity hides some complexity if you have lots and lots of different applications accessing the same fields. For this reason, we are seeing more organizations that use more than one tool. This then uses the best tool for the job which is needed by the end user community in that particular place. Let's take a look at the type of problem that we're going to solve as part of the demo. This is a SIPOC, remember, supplier, inputs, process, outputs and customers. And we've simplified the process down to the major steps that the user undertakes. So the user will receive an email with a new lead. The data from that lead will be keyed into the training CRM module. An account is assigned an owner, and then the same data is keyed into our customer relationship manager Insightly database, which is a browser-based application. And a confirmation email is then returned. This is a typical process that you often see with information being duplicated across multiple applications and multiple inputs and outputs, which really are just manually pressing buttons to pump data out to users or reports. Now the SIPOC gives us some additional information. The supplier of this information is a potential customer or marketing referral, so we know where the information is coming from. And we know that we receive the information either from a website contact form or from an email. And there are several outputs from this process. We talked a little bit about that email confirmation at the end, but there are other information that's going to be used out of the information we retrieve. This can be a list of monthly contacts, leads to be followed up, some ad hoc reporting on progress, or contacts that have been closed. All of these types of MI come out of the data, and the challenge is sometimes when data becomes inconsistent across multiple systems is you start to see information not matching up and lots of queries in terms of why that information is different. And who is the ultimate customer of these information? Well, we're assigning an owner, that's the lead owner, but also the sales director. So we probably also have the clear business owner in terms of who this process belongs to. So we're going to do a demo, first of all, to address the first component of that, of keying the data into a system. And we're going to use a new single data entry form to achieve that. Here's an example of the first bit that we're going to automate. So we've loaded the CRM, and the first thing we need to do is automate the process of clicking on the Contacts tab. This moves us along to that screen. The automation will then click the New button, and it brings up another screen. We will then enter 4 key pieces of information: the salutation, the first name, the surname, and the email address. And finally, we'll press Add. And we'll start to see that information appear on the screen down here. Before diving into more detail of the demonstration, I'm just going to talk a little bit about that presentation layer. Remember, we're developing this at the desktop, so an end user is going to interact with these automations. Each of the three solutions we're looking at provide different approaches to being able to create that presentation layer to interact with the end users. So the look and feel, and maybe sometimes the design approach that you take for capturing information may vary depending on the types of solution that you actually have at your disposal. We're going to look at Win Automation first of all. In this first part of the demo, we're going to create a dialog screen to enter some key details: the title, first name, surname and email. We're then going to take that information and we're going to populate the training CRM with it. So we'll launch the training CRM, we'll press the new button. In the new dialog we will enter those details, press the add button, and then we'll close the application down. So without any further ado, the first thing we're going to do is start to select the details that we need. And the very first instruction that we're going to need is to display a custom dialog box. So I'll start to type in the name of the instruction, display, and we start to see that down here we've got the display custom dialog. I drag that across over into the main panel and we get our creation form. The dialog box is going to be made up of 4 fields and a button, and the first of those fields is going to be a simple input box, much as we see there. Having pulled that information across onto our form, we're going to have to give it a name. So title, and the difference between its name and the label is this is the name by which it's going to be referred to when we're actually coding within the application, and this is what's going to appear over here on the screen. Now, we're not really going to populate lots of these fields for the demo, but I'll just give an example of the short description which appears underneath the main field, etc. We'll save that and we've got our very first field on the screen. The second field then is going to be the first name. And the next field, surname. Finally, we're going to add the email address. And we'll put on some buttons. Oops. Which we'll call add and cancel. Now, we've already created a function, so we'll come back to look at that, but in a short while we'll come back. So when we click the add button, we will run the code to add the details in. So this is our custom dialog box. There's a few of the dialog properties we can change, like the title. And also we're just going to set that cancel button so it doesn't do any validation on the screen before it closes the dialog. And of course the accept button will be our add. Now a couple of other bits of information about the create dialog. It's automatically creating some variables for us. These variables here, the custom dialog results and the custom dialog instance. Basically we can access details about the dialog by using those variables, and those system generated variables are created for us. So this is our first instruction then. Simply it's going to put a dialog box on the screen with the information that we've just entered. And there it is. So creating custom dialog boxes is very simple once you've got the basic design down. Now this won't do anything at the moment. Clicking add doesn't have any functionality yet, so we'll just cancel that out. Okay, so We created this function, it's over here on the side, called add contact to training CRM, where we're going to put all of the lines of code for adding the contact to the training CRM, copying them from that dialog box we've just created, placing them in the application. So the first thing we're going to need to be able to do is actually run the application. There we go, run application. So we need to know where the application is. So it's in this file here. So that's the location of the training CRM. The next thing we're going to need to do is now start to press the buttons, navigating through step to step within the application. Now Win Automation is actually doing a lot of work for us. It's actually automatically waiting until the application has loaded before it will issue the next instruction. Other applications give you a much lower level of coding to monitor the status of applications. So you have to put that code in yourself. It gives you greater flexibility in what you can do, but you need to consider all of the steps of the process. So different applications work very differently with the different underlying applications. So the application would have loaded. And would have placed us on this screen. So the first step is going to be to click Contacts and click New. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the very first thing we need to look for is the instruction or action called press button in window. There we go. Now, later on, when we start looking at the Insightly database, we're going to have to use the web-based forms for press button on a web page. But for today, for this one, this is going to be press button in a window. And it brings it up. Now, because we created all of our controls earlier, we can simply bring up the repository of controls and we can go and look for the contacts button there, add that, and we're good to go. So that's the first button pressed. The next step is to press the button New. So we'll do the same thing again. So now we're at the state where the new dialog is on the screen. So now we need to start populating the fields with the data that we've already entered into our own custom dialog box. So we're going to look for the instruction populate text field in window. And again, the controls have already been set up for us. We know the first control that we're looking for is the salutation. Now, this is the stage where we need to retrieve the information from our custom dialog box and place it into the application field. That custom dialog box, you may recall, had a variable set to it called the custom dialog results. And the way that we access the specific field is we simply put brackets, quote, title. And that was the variable name that I gave it when we created the dialog box. Now I'm just going to copy that because we're going to use that, or very similar to that, in some of the other fields. So that's our first field populated. Second field then will be first name. Oh, I've selected the wrong one. That was populate field on web page. Let me correct that. There we go. So the next field is first name. and this time, oh, custom dialog results, square bracket, quote, first name, quote, square bracket, send. Try copy that. Okay. Right, so we've got two more fields to do. We've got the surname, okay, and we've got the email address. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to press the button again. Button in window, that one there. Which is the add button on the contact dialog. Okay. And our final action will be to close the window. So we'll look for the controls. And we'll close the training CRM. Okay. So this is almost good to go. The one other change we need to make is going back to our custom dialog. Just open that up. And we just want to add some functionality to these buttons. So when we press the add button, we want to run our function add contact to training CRM. And when we press the cancel button, we want the window to close. Okay, well, if I've done it all correctly, this should now all work. Let's see. So here's our custom dialog. Mr. Testy test at test.com. And now when we press add, our dialog box should run. There we go. There's the fields going in. Add. Good. So let's cancel that. Our data doesn't seem to be there. Let's try that again. Ah, of course. I realise I was looking at the wrong tab. There we go. If we look at our salutation is missing. Let's have a look at that. So cancel that. So first thing I'm going to do is just have a look at the dialog box. Make sure that I've called the field the right thing. Title. T-I-T-L-E. No spelling mistakes. Right. First name, surname. Oh. So I've missed it out. So if we look at the code here, I run the application, I press the contacts button, I press the new button, and then the first populate field, text field I did was first name. So I need another one of those. So pop. And this time I'm going to drag it in above the first name. So there we go, salutation, okay, percent custom dialog results, square bracket, quote, title. Okay, so we populate the title, first name, surname, email, add. Okay, that all looks very good to me. So let's go back, run that again. So this time, Mr. Rob King, rob.king at wizard.co.uk. We'll add that. There we go. See that data going in. The application's closed down. We'll cancel that. We'll open the CRM, look at the contacts, and there we go. Mr. Rob King at wizard.co.uk. Good. So this is our first step of the automation. The second step, we're going to use that same information to simply populate another system called Insightly with the same information. This would be duplicated, and an end user would have either cut and pasted it or simply rekeyed the whole amount again. But before we do that, we're going to move on and have a look at some of the other solutions. So looking at this section, we've really broken it down into 3 different layers: the physical objects layer, the presentation layer, and then the business logic. So we saw at the physical objects layer the actual underlying systems, the contacts tab, the new button, the dialog with the data entry for title, first name, surname and email, and then the add button, all of which we interacted with directly from the business logic. We also built a new presentation layer, which provided the user with the ability to key in information. This was just in this example. You can pull data from multiple different sources, such as spreadsheets or directly from the other systems. And then we constructed the business logic. And the business logic was represented as a workflow that was shown as text, as you can see, and we've taken a snapshot on the screen here. And the steps it went through was basically to provide a single capture screen, which provided the presentation layer, and then run a function when we click the add button that launched the CRM app, that clicks the context tab, that clicked the new button, that placed the details from our presentation layer into the underlying application, clicked add, and then closed the CRM. All of this business logic interacted directly with the physical objects on the screen. In the next example, we're going to see a solution that provides an interim step between physical objects and business logic.